It'll just take me a moment to get situated. And does anybody remember while I do? I'm going to put these away. Do you remember Potsy's joke on Happy Days? When he said, would you ever hit a guy with crutches? And the punchline is, no, I'd hit him with my fist. You can ignore these. I'm happy to say that my injury was not related to anything but stupidity. My own stupidity. I guess I'm not happy to say that, but that's the truth. So, how New Mexico can beat Texas? For real? The question mark is not part of the title of my speech, but a friend of mine called me when he saw it and said, now that's a teaser. Now let's the business I'm in. I honestly believe we can beat Texas, and I want to tell you a little bit about why. Now, you're all probably familiar with the old truism that a fish doesn't know that it's living in the water until maybe the fisherman pulls it up on the boat, and by then it's too late for the fish. Well, the same thing was true of me growing up in New Mexico. It wasn't until I was forced to leave the state, like so many of our kids are, to find a job, that I realized how differently people in other states think from here. Or I should probably say I realized how differently we here think from people in other states. Anybody who's been elsewhere understands that. It's a real curiosity to me that when you're in Austin or Phoenix or Boulder, you know, the common phrase is sort of like, why not here? Let's do it here. Whereas when you're in New Mexico, it's more normal to hear, well, we couldn't ever do that here. Or when you're in those other cities and they say, let's do something different. What do we say in New Mexico? New Mexico is different. So we've been beaten down for so long, it's almost as if we believe that it's our sort of rightful place to be behind our neighbors. And I don't think that's true. I don't think it needs to be true. And I surmise that those of you in this room probably don't think it's true either. I am fortunately seeing evidence that the attitude that's held us back is beginning to change. And I want to share that with you today because it makes me very, very hopeful. It might be the number of people like me who've left and come back and who've said, you know, there's a different way of thinking about things, there's a different way of doing things. Or it might be the newcomers that have trickled into our state over the years, recent years notwithstanding, with our exodus of population. A lot of new people have come here. Maybe it is our young people, like my kids, who grew up, you know, as millennials with technology and a broader perspective and are scratching their heads and kind of saying, why do we tolerate such defeatist thinking here? I don't get it. Or maybe it's just because we're all thinking enough is enough. But whatever the reason, I am bullish on our state. And I believe we may be entering a very exciting time, and that, yes, indeed, we can beat Texas for real. Now, I know that's a bold statement. Even if we are getting fed up with the status quo, we are New Mexico, and Texas is Texas. I looked up some statistics, which you have a sense of, I don't know if you know, but New Mexico is the 5th largest state in the union. Texas is twice our size geographically. Texas has more than 12 times the population that New Mexico has. Unsurprisingly, their economy is more than 15 times our size. And this statistic might blow your mind. In 2014 alone, Texas created more than 450,000 new jobs. That is more than 34 times the number of new jobs we created in New Mexico. So you might say, well, how can little old New Mexico beat big old Texas, no matter how fired up we are? And I would say to you that, admittedly, head-to-head it could be tough. But, head-to-head, Floyd Mayweather could not beat Deontay Wilder. Now, you've probably heard of Floyd Mayweather, but you probably have never heard, I surmise, of Deontay Wilder. Has anybody heard of Deontay Wilder? No hands. Well, Deontay Wilder is 6'7". He's 220 pounds. He has an 84-inch reach, and he's the WBC heavyweight champion of the world. Floyd Mayweather stands 5'8". He's 150 pounds soaking wet, and he has a reach 12 inches shorter than Wilder. But none of us have ever heard of Deontay Wilder, and most of us have at least heard of Floyd Mayweather. He's the highest paid athlete in the world. He made $105 million last year. So that proves the point that you don't have to be the biggest to win. Our GDP is not going to surpass Texas's GDP anytime soon. And our paltry, minuscule, $6.2 billion state budget is not going to surpass theirs, which is currently at $94.6 billion. At least I hope we never surpass their state budget. But to beat Texas, we don't have to beat them toe-to-toe. That's kind of my point. Just as Floyd Mayweather will never have to get in the ring with Deontay Wilder. We'll just have to beat them pound for pound. We have to beat them in showmanship. We beat them in making the news, beat them in momentum, beat them in building our brand, if you will. If you think of Texas as Walmart, we can be Target. That's cool, isn't it? If Texas is KFC, we can be Chick-fil-A. Who wouldn't want to go there? And if Texas is Budweiser, we can be what? The most interesting state in the world. We can be Dos Equis if we stay thirsty, my friends. We're smaller, but we can be better. We can be cooler. We can be more attractive to people who are deciding where to go. Texas has some knocks against it that we don't. To beat Texas, our task is simple. We have to become more noteworthy. We have to become more inspiring. We have to become more newsworthy. We simply have to offer a better story. And that's something that we can do if we're smart, if we play our cards right. Now, we already have some built-in advantages. I would say it's a lot prettier here than it is in Texas. Would you not agree? It's also a lot more comfortable in the low humidity, high desert, despite our current temperatures. I'd still rather be here than in Dallas, Fort Worth, or Houston. And we all know that, dare I say it, I hate to even say the word Tex-Mex. It doesn't even compare to what we have as regional cuisine in our state. We hear a lot of stories about our kids, and I was one of them, having to leave to find jobs. And that's a tragic thing, but we also hear stories of those same kids, and I was one of them, making sacrifices to get back to New Mexico because there are some things about this state that are just really, really special, despite our anemic economy. And I believe that if and as we began to change things, we might see a lot of those young people who have left come back, and they'll bring with them not only the experience they've gained in other places, but the can-do mindset that we all get when we leave here and sort of get that readjustment from living in other places. As I said, momentum will build on momentum, and success will build on success. And if we can turn this thing around, before long, we can have a really hot economy. I know saying that today might sound odd to you, but it really wouldn't take much. If you put 10,000 new jobs in Texas, that's a rounding error. If you put 10,000 jobs in New Mexico, it's a miracle. Isn't it? And that right there really frames the question of what I want to talk with you about today. How exactly can we add thousands, 10,000s, 20,000 new jobs to New Mexico? And how can we add the population and the income and even the state budget revenue growth that comes with those jobs to make our state the economic success story of the next decade? That's how I frame the question of how can we beat Texas, even pound for pound. Well, beyond our natural advantages, we do have a growing sense of economic crisis in our state, which I think is obviously a bad thing. But if Intel does announce that it's going to leave, and everybody's thinking that they might, that's going to get palpably worse, the sense of crisis here. And it's not a good thing, but it might be just what we need. We could end up looking back on the sense of crisis that we have that could get worse before it gets better, and look at it as a blessing, because it finally shook us loose from our crazy ways of thinking. We know the founders of our nation considered the states laboratories of democracy. And since you can't separate economic freedom from political freedom, that makes the states laboratories of economics as well. And for the past 70 years, suffice it to say, we've been on a trajectory far different than our neighbors to the east, and our neighbors to the north, and the west, for that matter. More like our neighbors to the south. Part of that is due to the outsized investment of the federal government here during and after World War II. That explains a lot of how New Mexico came to be New Mexico. But part of it is also due to the singular mindset that has ruled here for 70 years. We've really been stuck in sort of one way of thinking, and that's what we need to change. You might say that we've been the state laboratory of economics that proves what doesn't work. I actually see that glass as half full, though, whether it's the spirit of the times or our sense of crisis or just the general sense of being sick and tired of being last in everything. I believe we're staring at a permanent sea change in our state. We're starting to recognize that the way it's been done is not the way it needs to be done, and we have nobody to blame for it but ourselves. So that's what I want to share with you today. I see a handful of developments, there are 5 that I want to mention, that are starting to gain currency and traction in our state. These are ideas that people like us can advance by leveraging another advantage we have over Texas, the fact that we're a small state, population-wise. As you know, it's pretty easy to get an appointment with anybody here. Anybody can pretty much see anybody, and that's not true in big states like Texas or California. The first development is the immense amount of activity that's buzzing around in the startup community here. I don't know how many of you are involved with it, but the fact that we even have a startup community now is new and noteworthy. And it's something we should all be excited and proud of. I often joke to my family that about 17 years ago, I quit going to somebody oughta meetings. You know what those are? Those are meetings where you sit around and somebody says, somebody ought to do this or somebody ought to do that. And historically, that somebody was Pete Domenici or Jeff Bingaman, or it was Bruce King, or it was Bill Richardson, and we all just were in a learned state of helplessness. I said forget that, and I determined to spend my time trying to do something to help turn the economy around, to help create jobs and bring cash into our economy. And for the past 20 years, that's what I've been doing at my company. And I'm proud and pleased to say that though we're a small company, we've been doing our part. We are a net importer of wealth into New Mexico. Today, though, I'm seeing a lot more people saying, let me be that somebody too. I'm seeing people who are intent on building that entrepreneurial ecosystem here. And you can cite things like startup weekends, or creative startups, or ABQID, these things that you're reading about in the newspaper. You might not know exactly what's all involved with them, but they're really very exciting, and they're all about creating our own jobs. The Innovate ABQ initiative with the new epicenter downtown, that's part of it as well. Now, in this arena, we're going to see more failure than success, especially initially, because frankly, we're new at this. We haven't really thought about creating our own jobs in the past. But we will see success, and that success will be part of the momentum that we'll be beginning to build. All it's going to take in this arena is one or two companies to go public or to get bought, or as Lavu did, get that big round of funding, to have people sort of wake up and say, wait a minute, maybe we're not so different after all. Maybe it can happen here. The private sector, as Paul alluded to in his kind introduction of me, creating its own jobs is the surest route to success. That's what we need to do. We need to unleash the private sector. And to me, that's the first and most notable and the most encouraging thing that I see happening. There is a movement afoot to create private sector jobs through innovation. And the best part about it is, it doesn't depend a lick on what happens in Washington, D.C. or in Santa Fe. It doesn't depend on that at all. We control our own destiny. Now, having said that, Washington, D.C. and Santa Fe are still an issue. We all know how screwed up the federal government is. And while it affects us deeply, there's not a whole lot we can do here in 5 electoral vote New Mexico. We're always sort of left out of that picture. But when it comes to Santa Fe, it's a different story. We control our own destiny. Thomas Sowell is an economist that I'm a fan of. Many of you probably are as well. And he says it's really hard to find a well-governed, poor country. Let that sink in for a minute. It's really hard to find a well-governed, poor country. To the extent that that applies to states, I think New Mexico might be the poster child. Government can't create jobs. It can't create an economy. But what government can do is tie down an economy, as we saw yesterday with this new Workplace Fairness Act. Government can tie it down and cause it to stifle. Or government can unleash an economy if it just gets out of the way. I don't know if you noticed, but in 2014, there was a change in the House of Representatives in New Mexico, a change in power. There's no guarantee that that's going to remain through 2016, but there's also no guarantee that it's not going to extend into the Senate, particularly because of the dust that's been stirred up by what I see as encouraging development number 2, a development that was only spoken about in hushed tones as recently as a year ago. Last summer, I was sitting in a meeting full of business people. I hadn't met Paul yet, hadn't written my piece for the Business First, and we were discussing ideas like startups and incubators and ways that we could sort of unleash the private sector economy here in New Mexico and turn the economy around. And during the discussion, an obstacle came up that we still face. It was a little 3-word phrase, and as soon as somebody uttered it, it was really funny. We all looked around the room and we kind of made sure there were no open windows for fear of who might hear. Do you know what little 3-word phrase I'm talking about? Paul kind of spoiled it. Right to work. Now, nationwide experts say that half or more corporations looking to expand won't even consider a state that isn't right to work. And it's a deceptive statistic because companies won't come out and say that because they'll get in a lot of trouble. But privately, they'll tell you, no, we're not going to consider that state, especially when you have 24, 25 states that now are right to work. Conservative estimates say that in New Mexico, we're actually missing out on half of the opportunities that we have to attract that Tesla factory, regardless of how you feel about that, or a Frito-Lay plant, or some other form of high-wage manufacturing jobs. And just yesterday, I read new research from Stanford that showed that employment growth is twice as high in states that are right to work. It's really a no-brainer. And amazingly, from literally being mentioned in hushed tones less than a year ago, fear of reprisal or maybe fear of being thought naive, like that could never happen here. It not only ended up in the newspapers, it ended up in the House of Representatives, and it passed the House of Representatives, and people who know have told me that it would have passed the Senate as well, had it been able to get to the floor. You believe that? That's incredible. And we're within a whisker of getting it passed, and I believe that's going to happen. And if and as we do, that's going to be something very notable, and it underscores an important point about how the changes we make can build upon one another in our quest to beat Texas. Not only is right to work within a whisker of passing, I believe it'll pass within either the next session or the session after that. Any changes we make are going to be immediately noticed by the broader economic development and business community. See, the economic development market is like the stock market. Every piece of information that's out there and available on a publicly traded company is factored into its stock price. It's an efficient market. And the economic development market is very similar in that every aspect of every state's economy is factored into the rankings and formulas and spreadsheets of the people who make economic development decisions. When something relevant changes in a city or a state, just like in a publicly traded company, all the models change. And when all the models change, the conversations change. If we can make right to work happen and a few other things that I'm going to talk about, we could be on the lips of every economic development expert in the country, in the world for that matter. We could actually become the hot growth stock. I know that sounds far-fetched, but it's really not. Right to work is one of those opportunities, and we are this close. Another opportunity is my third encouraging development, and that's the growing consensus for real tax reform in New Mexico. We all know that taxes are prices, and our current tax structure makes the price of living in New Mexico higher than it is in other states. That's a problem because taxpayers, whether they're individuals or corporations, they move from high tax locales to low tax locales. They have the motivation and the mobility to be able to do that. Those people and those companies that don't have mobility, so people with lower incomes and fewer options, or companies with lower profits and fewer resources, stay put. And they do the best they can, but they're left with a greater share of the taxes. The poor get poorer, you might say. For too long in New Mexico, our tax structure has just put a damper on economic growth. You might say it's perpetrated the perfect crime against our economy, even as our neighbors next door, Texas, are getting fat and happy. It's really a shame. Here's how we need to think about taxes, the price for living in New Mexico. It's a really simple question. How can we ensure that more people are doing more economic activity here? That's really what it's all about. How can we ensure that more people are doing more economic activity here? And the good news is there's empirical evidence as to how to bring that to pass. Eliminating the income tax, which might sound like a radical idea, is the single best thing we could do in this state to spur economic development. 7 other states have eliminated it entirely, personal income tax. 3 states are working on it now. Red state Arizona, not really a surprise, but they're our neighbors, so that's a problem. Swing state Ohio, interesting. And perhaps the bluest of blue states, Maine, is working on eliminating its personal income tax. They'll be states 8, 9, and 10, and they'll just put us in a worse place. The reason they're doing it is there's overwhelming evidence based on IRS statistics that people and wealth move from high tax states to low tax states. And while every state has a different tax structure, the income tax is the most salient tax in that regard. It's the most sexy thing that people tend to look at, rightly or wrongly. And we now have conclusive empirical proof that over time, states with no personal income tax outperform others in economic growth, in job growth, in population growth, in personal income growth, and, believe it or not, in government revenue growth, because there's more economic activity happening, and more people are moving into the state. There's really no reason not to do this. Eliminating our personal income tax would not only set our economy on fire, it would actually increase our tax revenue base if we had the political courage to do something that noteworthy. I think it's easy, but maybe it's not so easy. In the meantime, while we're considering that, while we're getting our nerves together about the personal income tax, we should probably focus on the thing that's actually hurting us the most, and that's our gross receipts tax. It's our biggest problem, and by all accounts a mess. Now, the old way of doing things, which the gross receipts tax is based on, wasn't right, but there was a certain sort of logic to it, in that after World War II, the gross receipts tax was the easiest way for our state and city governments to get a share of the spending that was coming out of Washington. You can't tax the federal government, but you can tax the companies that do business with the federal governments. So there was sort of a logic in how the gross receipts tax came together. Unfortunately, we all know what's happening with federal spending, so that's not doing us any favors. And to make things worse, the tax itself has grown really unwieldy through a variety of deductions and credits, and it's just, as a business person who's tried to get a ruling out of Santa Fe for how we should tax, they don't even know their own law. It's just become that unruly and unwieldy. There is good news though. There is a working committee in the legislature that has figured out by eliminating most deductions and credits, we can, in very short order, cut our gross receipts tax in half. Think about this. We could cut our gross receipts tax in half. What kind of an impact would that have on economic development? What kind of an impact would that have on the state's momentum and make your news without there? So, right to work, right around the corner. Eliminating or reducing our gross receipts tax, it's right within our grasp. Perhaps someday we can reduce our income tax as well. I think we should set a course for that quickly. But not all of our problems are that straightforward, and I don't want to be dismissive about them. There are a couple of other big intractable issues that come up over and over again when you mention economic development and New Mexico in the same sentence. And that leads me to my encouraging developments, number 4 and 5, or maybe I should say encouraging potential developments, number 4 and 5. I have a question. How many of you, if you had a consistently underperforming division in your company, would give in year after year after year to your manager's demands for a bigger budget? Wouldn't you instead do the opposite, threaten to cut the budget, or fire the managers, or restructure entirely unless they put things right? Do you know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about public education, which is a $2.75 billion industry. I hate to even use that word, in New Mexico. $2.75 billion in a state with a little over 2 million population. Their budget went up by $36.6 million this year alone. Poor people. That's more than $8,000. Think about this. We spend more than $8,000 on each and every student in our state. That's an incredible number. And obviously it's not working well enough. Public education represents 44%, almost half of our state's general fund. If you add in higher education, that number goes up to 58%. And I think we should add in higher education because that's where our poorly educated public school students get promoted or dumped, depending on your perspective. And then we, the business world, have to cope with that when they get graduated out of college. It's such a huge and all-encompassing issue that more people from every side of the aisle, I was going to say both sides, but every side of the aisle, are calling for us to do something, do anything. And there's a big fight going on about this now. You know what the big fight is about? Social promotion, third grade social promotion. Okay, it's a legitimate fight, but it's one piece. It's just one little piece. And I believe that if we don't get distracted by fighting to the death over one hill in the battle, we can make significant changes and enhancements to our public education system. In Texas, not surprisingly, they're pursuing a comprehensive solution whereby 60% of the education budget, or in their case, that's $5,200 per student, can follow the student to a private school. That's what they're going for. The balance remains in the public school system to help them pay their bills. They're simply calling it statewide school choice. They just completed their legislative session. It didn't get done, but it will get done because they're Texas. And because of what Nevada just did. I don't know if anybody's paying attention. But Nevada did something radical. The governor just signed legislation that passed establishing the nation's first statewide education savings account program. It's really very exciting. For parents earning above a certain income level, the state will deposit 90% of the per pupil budget, in their case that's $5,100, into an education savings account. Parents below a certain income level will get 100% of the state's per pupil education budget deposited into their education savings account. And they can use that money on any legitimate educational expense, private schools, distance learning, online programs, tutoring, you name it. And they can carry over year to year, this is a savings account, the money in their account. Incredible idea. Sounds kind of simple, doesn't it? There is this nascent but real trend emerging, as the Wall Street Journal put it, of shifting government from a monopoly provider of education into an enabler of education, which I think we would all agree is certainly a step in the right direction. A handful of states like Texas and Nevada have taken the lead on it, and while there's no doubt that each of their solutions is going to have their own unintended consequences, we don't know exactly what those are, we'll have to keep an eye on it. It's an encouraging wave that we, in our small, needy, and crisis-ridden state, can ride if we just have the vision to do it. We can step up. So since everybody agrees that education in New Mexico needs reform, and everybody agrees that it's an ugly public issue that's holding our kids back and sending our graduating kids out of state and keeping companies at bay from relocating or expanding here, and since everybody agrees that reform itself has become a political football, we need to do something about it. At the statewide level, We have these huge, powerful, fight-to-the-death factions that they're not neighbors, they don't go to the grocery store together, and they are one-issue groups. And they just fight it out, not ceding any turf on this issue. To me, the reason the education debate isn't getting anywhere at this point is it boils down to something that somebody really hasn't mentioned yet, and that it's this: one size can't fit all. The government is too big to run an effective public education system. That's true nationally, and it's true on a state level. There's just too many variables. No matter what we try to do on a statewide basis as far as reform goes, somebody's not going to like it. And probably justifiably so, because it's not going to work for everybody. You know, do you dumb down students from Rio Rancho or economically strong areas by keeping your standards low? Or do you make it impossible for kids from disadvantaged communities to graduate? One set of standards would do one or the other, or maybe both. I looked at one example of a community in New Mexico, Deming, down in the southwestern part of our state. The percentage of kids who are eligible for free or reduced lunch in Deming, which is an indicator of poverty, is twice the national average. It's 99%. Yeah. The Deming School District is ranked a C- in academics, a C- in administration and policies, and a C- in educational outcomes. I think the people of Deming deserve better. And get this, with 5,435 students, Deming's share of our public education dollars is more than $43 million. Deming, $43 million. Don't you think that an enterprising entrepreneur or two or three could come up with a way to get a better return on those dollars for the parents of the kids in Deming, New Mexico? Isn't there a way we can get those kids taught and fed, if need be, at better than a C- level? I do. Just as the states are laboratories of the national economy, communities can be laboratories of the state economy. So instead of sort of refereeing the earth-shattering power struggles between the gargantuan factions in Santa Fe, I think we should devolve power in this arena. I think we should distribute it. I think we should pursue education reform at the community or even the neighborhood level. So I propose a radical idea. I propose that we combine the momentum we have in the startup community and what we're learning about there with our educational challenges and launch a startup weekend focused on new private sector educational models. Go with me for this on a minute. We can have the best minds in the state, reform-minded teachers and principals who aren't stuck in the status quo, entrepreneurs, technologists, vested community members, you name it. Rethink this whole education thing from a private sector perspective and within the financial constraints of the resources that we have. 100% of the budget, 90% of the budget, 60% of the budget, whatever. We can figure it out. In the spirit of why not here, there's no reason we can't do it. Launching an education-focused startup weekend requires neither the blessing nor the permission of government, any government. It's just up to us. If the private sector, I believe, takes education reform and develops some new and interesting models, we can then go to the people who temporarily, and I underscore that word, temporarily control the purse strings of the state, and we can get those models funded. And we can devolve power back into the hands of parents and teachers where it belongs. This would allow us to pursue the best of both worlds, funding education based on a statewide per pupil average, so we're not leaving anybody behind, but innovating based on free market principles. And, as I said, return to local communities their right of educational self-determination, which we've completely lost sight of in our society today. If we have the proper incentives and safeguards in place, even the most disadvantaged communities like Deming can address their educational challenges with models that fit them. I do believe that whatever education reform ends up looking like, it'll take some time to manifest itself in the statistics, that everybody will use to say it's working or it's not working. But I dare say that parents whose children are the beneficiaries of a new model will know right away, don't you think? That's the beauty of the private sector. They'll know. They'll be fighting to get into these schools. And, as with right to work and as with tax reform, anything we do in this arena will capture the attention of the nation, adding to our momentum, just as Nevada got a bunch of press based on its reforms. Imagine this, a prospective company is looking at moving or expanding into Albuquerque, or anywhere else in New Mexico for that matter. One of their executives says, so if we set up shop here, where would our kids have to go to school? And the answer is, wherever they want. Bam. All the statistics, all the stuff that drags us down, they're no longer relevant. I mean, they're there, but they're no longer relevant. So we haven't fixed education yet, but perceptually, We fixed the perception of education in New Mexico because we're being bold and we're pursuing new opportunities. If we evaluate and emulate sensible reforms that are happening based on this wave of educational reform that's beginning to sweep the nation. Teachers can teach, parents can choose, children will get educated. And that will make us immediately more competitive. That will make us better able to keep our better educated kids here at home. That will better attract companies looking to expand or relocate. Isn't that the most compassionate and dare I say progressive thing we could do? So, educational innovation, tax reform, right to work, a growing startup economy. I don't know about you, but I think, maybe just a little bit, Texas might start sweating, just a little bit, when they see us doing it. And when they do, we might be able to quench their thirst with my last development, and that is, of course, water. Now, whether you believe our water issues in New Mexico are real or imaginary, there's some debate about that. Nature-made or man-made, there's a lot of debate about that. There's no question we don't have as much water as we once thought. And certainly it's a perceptual issue for those of us looking at the New Mexico brand, people looking at us from around the country. What we do know is that we have at least as much water as the nation of Israel does. We also know that the nation of Israel's landmass is about the size of the 4-county area. Were you aware of that? And we also know that the nation of Israel supports 10 times the population of the 4-county area with the water that they have. Israel's water usage remains at 1964, 51 years ago, levels, despite their population increasing by 4-fold in that time. And they now secretly, sort of, trying to keep it hush-hush, have a surplus of water because they've done such a great job managing it. It's been a combination of conservation, we've done some of that here, reclamation, desalination, appropriate regulation, and, this is vital, innovation. Israel is home to 280 water technology companies. Drip irrigation, which I have in my backyard, you may as well, was invented in Israel. There's a company there that has 3,000 employees and sells in 150 countries. The country has become a hub of water science and water entrepreneurialism, and as you might suspect, has attracted the venture capital to support it. Do you see where I'm going with this? New Mexico could become the Israel of the US in water management and innovation. Now, unlike some of the other things I was talking about, this would be sort of a moonshot kind of a commitment, because there's a lot of different players involved. But unlike the original moonshot, there is a guarantee that this would work, because it's been done. Israel has proven it. If we foster a water innovation ecosystem, we not only address one of the biggest questions people have about New Mexico, what about the water issue? But we could create an entirely new industry growth sector and thousands of new jobs and put ourselves on the map. If ever there was a stone that could knock 2 big fat birds out of the sky, this is it. Important clarification here, if anybody's getting scared in this room. I'm not talking about creating a top-down government-driven program or a war on thirst or any of the other political platitudes that our congressional delegations say in front of the joint session of the legislature or at the Chamber of Commerce. That's not what I'm talking about. That's the old way of thinking. I'm talking about private initiative. Or, when I say we as a state, I don't mean we the state. I mean we the people. Like that phrase? We the businesses, we the innovators. We can do this. I firmly believe in the knowledge economy and the power of innovation. And that the business community and academia, and yes, the labs, and yes, government in limited and appropriate ways can collaborate. And based on real-world economics and real-world entrepreneurial thinking, we can address this, even our most intractable natural resource issue. And of course, I think with private sector leadership, we can solve it. Now, I'm getting into a little bit of dangerous turf on the water issue. Forgive the mixed metaphor. But I'm not an expert in it. I'm not a scientist. I don't work in the industry. And if you ask me questions, I could get pretty out of my depth. That's a better metaphor pretty quickly. But what I do know is there are smart local people already working on the moonshot approach. And that's a good thing, because guess what? A couple of years ago, Texas went to Israel. And as a result of Texas going to Israel to study its water approach, Texas is now investing $2 billion of infrastructure in water management and innovation. And that sort of brings us full circle. Texas, who we want to be, isn't sitting still, and they never will. No other states do. We can't beat them head to head, but pound for pound, I think our opportunities are looking pretty good. if we seize the day. We already have a much more beautiful state, a near perfect climate. We have the best cuisine in the world. We have fabulous arts and culture. We have a lot of other natural advantages over them. We are this close to passing right to work and a radical transformation of our gross receipts tax, which will change all the economic development expert models nationally. And if we don't get those things done this January, and we may not, well, following November, we have an opportunity to make another change in the state legislature. And we're this close to tipping the balance of power there. That's why I'm so optimistic. What used to be an insurmountable wall of economic ignorance in Santa Fe is quickly becoming a rickety fence. And we can go up there and knock it down. Finally, we can do that. As we embrace new ways of thinking, we can then ride the wave of education reform, perhaps lead the way in education reform, and take on water management industry innovation. Now, these are just 5 ideas. There are 5 things that are surfacing in front of us right now. As I said, we have the startup industry, we have tax reform, we have right to work, we have education reform, and we have water management and innovation. They may not be the only 5 ideas, I'm sure they're not. They may not be the best 5 ideas, and I'm not saying that I'm some sort of a prognosticator that has all the answers. But if we did pursue this avenue, can you see how things might begin to change in our poor little state? And can you see how we would be on our way to no longer being a poor little state? I can, and that's why I'm optimistic. If we quit just dinking around with old power struggles and old ways of thinking and silly regulations and trying to legislate wages and fighting over scraps, we can unleash our economy. And with apologies to the Celtic tiger, we might one day be known as the enchanted tiger here in New Mexico, our economy. That would be cool. And the good news is we're starting from such a low bar, it won't take very long to see. So, why am I saying this to you here now in this room? What can we do, 100 or so of us, to make Texas sweat? This is really the point of why I wanted to address you and why I'm here today. Although they're important, how we beat Texas is not necessarily dependent on the 5 things or the 3 things that I or anybody else advocates. I think beating Texas really boils down to one thing, and one thing only. My favorite quote is from an educator and author named Joseph Stoll. He says, "The world is the way it is because we are the way we are." It's our mindset that's the issue. It's always been our mindset. I believe that to get and keep this ball rolling, we, in this room, who have some understanding of how the world really works, need to speak up more. We need to speak up more, here, there, and everywhere. You know, it's funny because the libertarian personality tends to be sort of live and let live. And I believe that conservatives are, by political nature, polite people. But progressives aren't so much that way. They're in your face and they make no apologies and they have more influence than they deserve. And I think we need to change that. I am not suggesting we need to be rude, but if you'll permit one more quote from an old guy named Plato, it was just too good. He said, "The punishment which the wise suffer who refuse to take part in the government is to live under the government of worse men." So we need to write op-eds and letters to the editor and call our legislators, and pat them on the back for doing good and chastise them for doing bad. We need to post and tweet more. Some of you are saying, what did he just say? We should strategically donate to campaigns that are in key legislative districts. And I have to put in a plug to organizations like this that provide incredible research and thought leadership on the issues that are important to us. So there's about 100 of us in this room today. So imagine this. Imagine if we posted or tweeted 100 more times, 1 per person per week, on thinkings like this and topics like these. Or imagine if we sent in 100 more letters to the editor, just 1 per person per month, holding our politicians and our press accountable. Imagine if we wrote 100 more op-eds, just 1 per person per quarter, offering new ideas and critiquing worn out ones. This isn't a very big state, folks. Imagine if just a handful of us decided to pursue that new idea and create that new company and generate those new jobs and maybe be the company on the cover of Fast Company. And imagine if those of us who can donated $500, $1,000, or $10,000 each to the candidates and causes that can turn this thing around in the upcoming election. We're talking in this room 6 or 7 figures right there. And that could be the difference in the races that would make the difference for all of us, for all this stuff. See how close we are? They say demography is destiny, and there's some truth to that, but if it was entirely true, the United States would never exist. I don't believe demography is destiny. I believe determination is destiny. So let's talk and write and post and tweet and call and donate and start up and speak up. Let's be bold in holding our public officials accountable, not to mention our press. Let's tell them not to play small ball, but to truly lead. And if they're not doing the job, let's get rid of them. Let's get rid of them. We can do it. We're very close. We can demonstrate to our fellow New Mexicans that there's a new path, and not only is it not frightening, it's really full of possibilities. If we are unafraid and we get on with it. And then you might be surprised to find out that in a very short period of time, we're beating Texas, for real. Thanks for having me.
I won't speak into his lapel. I'll just say thank you very much, Steve. Oh, thank you. Quite a great set of ideas there, and you can see why I was so excited to have Steve talk at such an event like this. If you have any questions, we do have a few minutes. I know it's 1 o'clock, so if you need to take off, get back to work and pay some of those taxes, don't feel bad for getting up and leaving, but Steve will stick around for a few minutes until 1:15 or you run out of questions. But he has a pretty bold agenda and bold ideas that he's putting forth for our state, and I think, where do I sign up for McKee for president? Is that an option right now? There's still time. So just stand up right there. Nobody? Come on.
Nobody. Yes.
So while you're borrowing ideas from Israel, there's one that's described in chapter 10 of Startup Nations. It describes their USMA fund, which is the capitalization that they used in the early 90s to seed all the industry that has been created ever since. And that's really, I mean, your 5 ideas are right on point. Don't disagree with any of them. But you need to add the 6th idea.
Idea number 6.
Idea number 6 is how we raise the capital to feed the startups that will change our economy.
For those of you who can't hear, there's a lot of consternation in our state about we don't have the capital here. And while it's, well, it's a truism, okay, the private capital, it's a truism that money finds good opportunities. There's a lot of good opportunities in Silicon Valley, and so why would it leave there to come here? We do have a whole bunch of money in our state's permanent fund. And Israel has also, I don't know as much about it as Paul does, but Israel has also sort of set the stage for that and how they've funded startup companies. And that's a conversation that's on the table. There are issues associated with it, but I'd say let's throw it in the mix. That may be idea number 6. Any other points? Don't want to keep you all. Hang out. Oh, there's one back there.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, Mark.
I just wanted to underscore something you said. Your talk was fantastic. And I just spent the last 6 months getting deeply involved in economic development one way or another. 4 months of it on issues revolving around San Juan right now and Kenya. What was it was a learning experience for me. What was fascinating was, one, how difficult it was to get the business community to actually engage in something beneficial. And 2, how much difference you could make with individuals by going out and testifying, writing letters, speaking. I now know every PRC member, we know you on the app, which is probably not going to like.
Who are you for the room?
My name is Mark Trimmer, and I'm with RBC. And I don't represent any organization, but my point is every single point you made, especially about becoming an activist, is critical. That's the biggest lesson I learned in the 300 some odd hours I spent doing this in the last few months. There's not enough people out there taking the initiative. After looking backwards, I think what we need to make change here, exactly what you said, is change culture, capital, vision, and process. And one of the biggest things I think you could offer is really creating that vision. People here are looking for a vision to follow, a flag to follow behind. But people also don't realize you can get out there. You need to become an activist, not like the sense of progressives are, but in a manner which endears you to people who need information. Because I
And the good news is, and a lot of people here I have seen being active. The good news is, in years past, and I've been back in New Mexico for 25 years, you were screaming into the abyss, and it just felt like there was nothing. That's no longer true. That wall of ignorance that is now a rickety fence, we really can push it over. Even if the 100 of us in this room stood up, I totally echo that, Mark. Thank you. Okay, we'll wrap it up for today. I'll hang out if anybody wants to talk. Thank you for coming. Let's go get them.
Well done.
Great job. I've got a leadership section that is says sorry.
Okay, yeah, I bumped into him.
But I'm surrounded by
Good for him.
has, not less terms than it was before. Not on the
Everything in New Mexico is
Peter,
maybe 2,000 miles. Nothing.
yeah, I'm even more excited about
leaving to transition to
How about that?
here. Nothing is.
We could do one of those.
It's more or less.
This,
I got hit by a truck driver. My emails. Okay. Same.